Tonight, when the sun goes down, you're going to flip a switch. Light will flood the room. You won't think twice about it, but for most of human history, that switch didn't exist. When the sun set, the world went dark, and you might assume that meant everyone simply lay down and slept until morning. That assumption is wrong. The real answer is far stranger. Picture a small group of people around a dying fire. The sky has gone from orange to black. There is no artificial light for hundreds of miles, and yet almost nobody is asleep yet. They are talking, laughing. Someone is telling a story about the day's hunt. A child is asking questions nobody can answer. This wasn't a rare exception. For most of the time humans have existed, night wasn't dead time. It was some of the most alive time of the day. Here's the strange part. Modern researchers assume that people without electricity would sleep more than we do. More darkness, more hours, more rest. That seemed obvious. So in 2015, sleep scientist Jerome Siegel at UCLA set out to test it directly. His team studied 3 groups still living without electricity: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. These are hunter-gatherer and hunter-horticulturalist societies, living close to the way humans lived for tens of thousands of years. The researchers gave each person a small wrist device that tracked movement and light exposure day and night for over 1,000 combined nights. What they found broke the assumption completely. These groups slept on average less than 7 hours a night, not more than modern people. Less. They didn't nap during the day, and here's the detail that stunned the researchers most. They almost never went to sleep the moment it got dark. People stayed awake for hours after sunset, sitting by the fire, talking, tending to children, occasionally still working. Sleep came later, and it came fast, and it stayed consolidated until near sunrise. So what were they actually doing in those dark hours? Anthropologist Brian Wood, who worked with the Hadza during this research, described it simply. Nighttime was when people reflected on their day, what they'd seen, what they'd found, what they might do tomorrow. It was, in his words, a kind of nightly gathering. Sometimes there was singing, sometimes dancing. He called it a party in its own quiet way. Not chaos, not fear of the dark, community. Think about what that means. The dark wasn't just tolerated, it was used. It had a purpose that daylight didn't offer. During the day, there's work to do. There's walking, hunting, gathering, watching children, avoiding danger. The mind is occupied by tasks, but at night, with the fire holding back the darkness just enough to see each other's faces, something else could happen. Talk that wasn't about survival. Stories that explained the world, warned about danger, or simply made people laugh. Grief that finally had room to surface. Plans that only make sense once the noise of the day has quieted. Now here's where it gets even stranger, and this time the evidence comes not from the deep past, but from Europe, just a few centuries ago. Historian A. Roger E. Kirk spent years digging through diaries, court records, and medical texts from before the Industrial Revolution. He kept finding a strange phrase repeated across centuries and countries. People wrote about their first sleep, and then separately their second sleep. At first this seemed like a translation quirk. It wasn't. E. Kirk found over 1,000 references to this pattern, going back as far as ancient Greek and Roman texts. The pattern was this: people went to bed a few hours after dark and slept for 3 or 4 hours. Then they woke up, not in alarm, not with anxiety about insomnia, but as a completely ordinary part of the night. During this waking window, which could last an hour or more, people prayed, talked with the person next to them, tended a fire, visited a neighbor, or simply lay in bed thinking. Then, when they were ready, they drifted into their second sleep, which carried them until dawn. You don't have a word for this in your own life because you were never taught it existed. If you wake up at 3 in the morning and can't immediately fall back asleep, you probably assume something is wrong with you. You check the time with a flash of dread. You start doing the math on how many hours you have left. But for most of human history, that exact experience wasn't a malfunction. It was Tuesday. It was simply how a night worked. So what changed? Artificial light. First, candles and oil lamps made staying up cheaper and easier. Then gas lighting spread through cities in the 1800s. Then electricity finished the job. Suddenly, night could be pushed back, compressed, and treated like an obstacle between one productive day and the next. The gap between first and second sleep started shrinking. By the end of the 19th century, it had nearly disappeared. Doctors who had never heard of segmented sleep before began describing nighttime wakefulness as a new medical problem. They gave it a name: insomnia. That word barely existed as a common concern before artificial light took over the night, and this lines back up with Siegel's modern research. Remember the Hadza, the San, and the Tsimane? Only around 2% of them reported ever experiencing chronic sleeplessness. Some of these groups don't even have a native word for insomnia. Compare that to industrialized societies today, where roughly 10 to 30% of people report struggling with it regularly. The problem isn't that your body is broken. The problem might be that you've been asked to sleep in a way no human ever evolved to sleep. Here's a question worth sitting with. What if the anxious wakefulness you feel at 3 a.m. is not a glitch in your biology, but an echo of something ancient trying to happen anyway? Your ancestors used that window. They didn't fight it. They filled it with connection, reflection, quiet thought, sometimes intimacy, sometimes prayer, sometimes nothing at all except staring at the ceiling of a hut and letting the mind wander. You, on the other hand, have been trained to see that same window as failure, a problem to be solved with a pill, an app, or sheer willpower. There's something else buried in this story too. Darkness itself used to mean something different. It wasn't simply the absence of light, it was a shared condition. Everyone experienced it together at the same time, with no escape into a glowing screen or a lit room down the hall. That shared darkness might be part of why nighttime conversation felt different. Nobody could see your face clearly. Nobody could read a text instead of answering yours. There was nowhere else to go and nothing else demanding attention. Just the fire, the voices, and whoever was sitting next to you. You still carry pieces of this. Notice how conversations late at night often turn more honest, more vulnerable than the same conversation would in daylight. Notice how a slow walk after dark can loosen thoughts that felt stuck all afternoon. Notice how the version of yourself that shows up at midnight sometimes says things the daytime version wouldn't dare say out loud. That's not a coincidence, and it's not new. It might be one of the oldest patterns your species has. Modern life has mostly erased the outward version of this. The fire is gone. The shared darkness is gone. The forced pause between first sleep and second sleep is gone, replaced by phones that glow the moment your eyes open. But the underlying rhythm, the pull toward reflection once the noise of the day fades, doesn't seem to have left with it. It's still there, waiting for a version of night that has almost stopped existing. So tonight, when you flip that switch and the room floods with light, you're not just turning on a bulb. You're erasing the last trace of a night your ancestors would have recognized instantly. A night built for something more than sleep.